This is the Lincoln Journal-Star editorial board candidate interview with Senator Mike Hilgers, who is running for the GOP nomination for Attorney General. Senator, thank you for joining us on a busy morning. Robin Eshelman, our community member, is on board, but she is dark right now. Kent, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Mike. Kent Walgamot. I write about arts and entertainment. I've been on the editorial board for 12 years, and I promise no questions about water this time.
All right. And for the record, Kent, I ask you to introduce yourself for our readers. Everybody else knows you, so you don't really have to. All right. Well, Mike, thank you for joining us this morning. Our first question is kind of a good introductory one for you. You're well acquainted with the perils and joys of public service. Why do you want to be the Attorney General? And maybe it's just because you got to get out of the legislature. But why do you want to be the Attorney General? And then what experiences and attributes make you well suited for that office?
Well, I appreciate the question, and thank you both, or thank you all for making some time this morning and accommodating my schedule. I'm grateful for that. It's good to see you all again. So I think it's really, I think it's one of the most important roles we have in state government, in particular today. Of the last 10 years, the Attorney General has really evolved in a way that maybe it was differently from maybe 20 years ago in terms of the different roles and responsibilities that really only the Attorney General can execute on behalf of Nebraskans. We've had a really outstanding Attorney General the last 8 years, Doug Peterson. He's a good friend. And had he run again for a third term, I would not be running for Attorney General. But with him deciding to step down and not run for a third term, I thought it was a good mix of my experience and also the needs for the state. And if you think about the types of things that the next Attorney General is going to play an incredibly instrumental role. There's so many different issues. I'll lay out just a few. One is ensuring that the federal government stays within its constitutional lane and protecting Nebraska's constitutional rights. Over the last several years, you've seen last year in particular, I should say, you have seen a number of issues where the Attorney General, and only the Attorney General, both in Nebraska and around the state, have been able to ensure that the federal government stays within its lane. And we can unpack that maybe on a subsequent question. You can think about water rights, one of the issues that Ken alluded to, but I've been heavily involved in the legislature over the last year. You think about the discussions and potentially disputes between Nebraska and other states as we adjudicate our water rights. That's the Attorney General that handles that. If you think about the way that our law enforcement community over the last two or so years have been, I think, under stress, both from a recruitment perspective, but also they've been under a pretty significant spotlight. The Attorney General plays a really important role. I think it's the hub of the wheel, as it were, to help support law enforcement here in the legislature, but also help help rural communities around the state prosecute crimes. Those are just a few, and I think it matches up well with my experience. I've been a practicing attorney for almost 20 years, doing complex litigation work in courtrooms in Nebraska and around the country. And if you think about the AG is a big law firm. That's what it is. It's probably the most important law firm in the state of Nebraska, with well over 100 people on the team. That's exactly what I've done, I think, in a unique way. I built my law firm 11 years ago here in Lincoln, and built it now to we have over 100 personnel on our team around the country, doing maybe not the exact same cases, certainly, because only the Attorney General can handle some of those, but the same type of work, which is strategic, complex, difficult issues that take lots of really smart lawyers kind of being managed towards a larger strategic goal. And I think that the match between the experience and the need, I think, is why I'm running, Dave.
Okay. So you did a good job of starting to answer this question, but you may have a little bit more. So our current Attorney General, as you mentioned, he's been involved in, with other attorneys general on the 2020 election. He signed on as the state as a friend of the court, I believe, with the hormone therapy law in Arkansas. He's been involved in opioid settlements. what national issues, and you mentioned keeping the federal government staying in its lane, I believe were your words, but are there other issues that are outside of Nebraska that you are interested in being involved in as an attorney general?
It's a good question. Let me give you a couple and I think in some ways it's hard to answer because you just don't know what the world's going to look like in January 2023. And I'll give you two examples that Attorney General Peterson had to deal with that I don't think will happen again, but they might. One is the vaccine mandates litigation. And as you know, the Biden administration issued a number of different regulations mandating vaccines for companies around the country. And some of those were, if you recall, one of them was they had a basis under OSHA, one was under CMS regulations, and the OSHA one was found to be unconstitutional without authority. And that was one that was both adjudicated and fought. The attorneys general around the country, including General Peterson, fought on. It's also one I don't know what we'll have again next year. With the pandemic, maybe in a different, being in a different world, it's receding to a degree in the public mind. It's possible that we won't have to deal with a vaccine mandate issue. So another example would be, a similar example would be the eviction moratorium that the Biden administration issued about a year ago. You may recall at the time, President Biden actually said, hey, look, I don't think this is constitutional. In fact, the constitutional law scholars that we talked to said it probably isn't, but at the same time, it'll take some time to fight through. We're going to do it anyway. Ultimately, that battle was won in courts, the kind of thing an AG would do. Is that going to happen again in 2023? That type of thing? I don't know. It's really going to be, it's going to be dependent on the type of action that the federal government undertakes.
Okay. The Attorney General's office is where we go when we have disputes about public records and open meetings. I think the current Attorney General has been helpful on some issues, but like when it came to the documentation on acquiring death penalty drugs and things like that, we ended up in a court fight over it. That one we got. That one we won. But what's your philosophy on open meetings, public records, and is it likely to mirror the current Attorney General's, or do you have some different thoughts?
Well, by the way, I forgot one other example nationally, multi-state litigation, by the way, for your first question, Dave, one other thing, just to flag. If there are times where other states can go beyond their constitutional lane, say under the Dormant Commerce Clause under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, where they try to regulate interstate commerce in a way that they're not allowed. You think about California actually dictating some of the regulations around the production of eggs, as an example, that actually impacts Nebraska producers. So it's not just the federal government, it's other states within that constitutional framework. So I've been a supporter of open meetings and open records laws that we've passed in the legislature, and have supported open access during my time in the legislature, not just in open meetings, but also here in the legislature. As you know, Dave, we have a very, I think, a very robust and unique system here in the legislature compared to other states, where we allow pretty significant press access, both to the floor of the legislature as well as in executive sessions. And those things that have at times been under threat, but I've always defended in my 6 years the right of the press to be able to be present at those things. So I think I've got a record of defending press access. And the reason is because I think it's really important for the second house to be able to hold elected officials accountable. And so if you think about extending that logic to open records and open meetings, it's the same principle and the same concept. The public has to be able to know what's going on with their elected officials. And that's why we have those kinds of laws in place, both for the public, but also for the press. So I would strongly enforce the law that's on the books and ensure that, which I think the primary principle of the law is to ensure that there's open access to meetings. Each case is context specific. There are some exceptions, as you know, the legislature has exempted itself prior to my time here from open records requests. So that doesn't mean in any and all cases, in each and every case, we're going to just say, well, someone's requested it, principle of open access. Let's just give it. You have to follow the law at the end of the day and the facts. I don't see a material deviation from how General Peterson has applied it. My sense is from reading his work on a lot of those issues is that they've tried to fairly apply the law, but it will be context specific going forward.
Okay. So you've talked a little bit about mask and vaccine issues and the fact that you can't really see what's on the horizon. So maybe you've already answered this one, but that was unfortunately the question. What is there anything that you can see on the horizon that gives you pause? I mean, you're right. Nobody could have imagined COVID and the legal challenges that would surround that. But are there other things you're seeing or sensing out there?
Well, I'll maybe give you two examples. One is, it wouldn't surprise me if we see some litigation or at least some need for defense of Nebraska's rights over ultimately the spending of ARPA dollars. As you know, we have, of course, as you know, and your readers know, we had $1.04 billion of dollars from the federal government on ARPA. We just sent that proposal to the governor yesterday. In fact, there are pretty significant regulations and guidelines that are ever shifting on that. And so it's very possible, I hope not, hopefully it's not ultimately unlikely and doesn't occur, but it's possible that, say sometime next year, the federal government says, well, wait a second, this, $40 million you spent is actually not under the ARPA guidelines, and therefore we're going to claw it back. That's an area that potentially you could see come to fruition. I also, or could develop, I should say. Another one would be, and I think this is more likely, is what you're seeing with the Perkins County Canal. LB 1015, which is a bill I carried on behalf of the governor. It's on final reading. I expect that to go to be heard next week on the final stage of debate. Would help take the first step towards building the Perkins County Canal, which would defend Nebraska's rights under the 1923 Nebraska-Colorado Water Compact. That almost certainly is going to be an issue for the next Attorney General to hopefully just resolve. I think our rights under the compact are very clear, but if it can't be resolved or it requires litigation to be resolved, the next Attorney General absolutely will be faced with that issue. And on that issue in particular, I'll have a running start on the subject matter since I've gotten up to speed over the last several months, carrying that bill and working with the Attorney General and the governor.
All right. Well, you took the wind out of Kent's sails. No, you didn't. He's got a question.
Of course, I got to follow up.
You
on
said
that.
water, Mike. The magic word.
I did. I opened the door.
Do you think it will? There would be a possibility of settling that without it winding up in that eternal federal court case like compacts do?
It's a great question, Ken. I think it's unclear to me on what grounds Colorado would even try to initiate litigation. Now, I've been in plenty of cases in the past where it's been unclear to me how someone would actually file a suit or try to stop something and do it anyway. So I don't mean to suggest that Colorado wouldn't take legal action, but there's this other sense, I think, early on that, hey, this is just an effort to create leverage or to bluff. So the implication of that is that we have some right we're trying to obtain outside of the compact that we currently have, and that what we want to do is get Colorado to the table. So I think to some degree is where the question you just asked, which is what I hear from a lot of other people, sort of gets to, is like, well, can we resolve this? Well, the truth is, we have the rights under the compact that pretty clearly states, if we build the canal, we get these rights. And so the question in my mind is, what would a settlement look like? A settlement for us that goes beyond the compact. We already have a compact that's been approved by both legislatures and approved by Congress. It's unclear what we would want that would go beyond what we're already seeking, which is the ability to preserve those waters in the non-irrigated season, which we can already do on the compact. So my hope is we would be able to build the canal and just work with our Colorado partners to make, as we have been doing, by the way, over the course of many years, to make sure that everyone has access to the water and we're all being good stewards of the water. But we can't do that in the same way if we don't trigger our legal right under the compact, which is by building the canal.
But if it gets into federal court, that can take forever.
No, it certainly could. Yes, absolutely. It certainly could take some time. I would tell you, as if we don't file it, which is not your question, if we don't build the canal, we are very clearly giving up the right to the water. And so I think it's certainly a fight worth having. And my style in the legislature as a practicing litigator, or in life generally, is look, always be prepared to fight and stand your ground for what you need, what you're trying to do strategically, but always at the same time look for solutions, opportunities to resolve it, whatever the dispute might be. And so if I was Attorney General, and this issue, which I think will be a very important issue next year, almost certainly for the next AG, my view would be, I'm going to do everything I can to put Nebraska in the strongest position possible legally to be prepared to fight it through to the finish, whether that's a 10-year lawsuit or not. But at the same time, help find, if we can, if it's at all possible, find a way for a solution that avoids that kind of a court fight. Or a protracted court fight, I should say.
All right. Ken's quiet, so that means I can ask the last question.
Oh, are we ready for the last one? I got a couple more.
Okay, well, we want to get to the last one, and we want the senator to be there on the floor when he needs to be. So go ahead, Ken.
Well, these are pretty quick. I think a lot of people don't understand that the function of the Nebraska Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney General are pretty different, and there's a lot of kind of an advisory element in your for the Nebraska Attorney General, for both legislature, for the governor. You have to sort of defend state government in some sense in court, and that's how do you balance all of those things, right? How do you, like, particularly because it's involved in the political aspect of it as well.
That is, I think, a really outstanding question, because I've seen firsthand, Ken, exactly in many ways how that plays out in different contexts. In fact, while it is true that generally speaking, the Attorney General represents the legislature in court, I have been involved in, and when I first became executive board chair, which was before I became speaker, the tail end of a lawsuit in which the Attorney General was on the opposite side of the legislature, because it was if you may recall, the subpoena of Director Frakes that the legislature had issued before I was exec board chair, and that actually went to the Supreme Court, and it was a battle. We had private counsel. So I've seen up close sort of how difficult some of those issues can be for the Attorney General to navigate, especially if there's inter-branch disputes, say between the executive branch and otherwise. I've also seen up close and personal how important the Attorney General is to providing, say, advice. I shouldn't say advice. I don't want to imply it's actually legal advice, but guidance on their legal judgment and their conclusions to the legislature regarding their Attorney General opinions regarding, say, the constitutionality of certain legislation. So I've seen all of that. And the answer to your question of how do you navigate that, at the end of the day, the great thing about the Attorney General's office, and the great thing about the law generally, is the law is you have to apply the law without regard to party, person, or personality or politics. And that's beaten into your head rightly as a first-year law student. And for 20 years, I have been bound by, almost 20 years, I should say, bound by the ethical obligations of being an attorney, been fighting in court and ensuring that you've got to be able to articulate the law as you see it, without regard to personality. And so it's incredibly important, but it's also a very easy safe harbor, because if you're applying the law, nothing else matters. And I think that's how, if you're doing that, I think people understand that. I think it's defensible, and that's the only way that job can be executed the right way, in my opinion, is just to follow the law wherever that happens to take you. And so that's how I would answer that question, Ken.
And then this is a real quick one. Given your law firm, will you have to sort of set that aside in some fashion, your relationship while you're Attorney General, or will you? Or
yeah, I'll certainly would have to. There is actually a statute in play that says, as one example, you cannot, there are actually a number of different legal obligations. One is in statute that says the Attorney General cannot engage in the private practice of law for compensation. So certainly we'd have to follow that. There are also ethical rules that are in place in terms of when private attorneys take a public position or vice versa, or with conflicts. For instance, if someone is an attorney and they represent an entity or a person, and then they can't then go represent the adverse party on that same subject matter. There's a lot of complex rules. I'm aware of those. I will tell you, we're going to follow the spirit and letter of the law 100%, but I got to get, we'll see what happens, get through, if I can win the primary, we'll do a deep dive in. I think the people of Nebraska can be very confident that I am going to follow all the laws, ethical rules, and to ensure that transition occurs. But I will tell you, I will say this, my firm, I mean, it's a unique firm in this regard. Most law practices are built solely around the personality of their partners. And which means when a partner leaves, it is very difficult to sort of replace. I've kind of built a unique firm, and I don't want to digress too far into this, although it's kind of a fun conversation for me, where over the last couple of years, I've kind of built it out more like a business. And so I have a CEO and division heads who run the firm. And as speaker over the last 2 years, I actually have not had to engage in the same way. So the firm actually is very prepared for me to step away from the firm. So we'll be prepared to do that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. That's what will happen.
All right. Well, the last question for you, Mike, is what have we not asked you that you wish we would have?
Oh, that's a great question. I think at a high level, we covered the waterfront. I certainly would be grateful to earn Nebraskan support. I would be grateful to earn the editorial board support for the primary. I don't really have anything to add. I just appreciate all that you guys do. And, just wish, hopefully I get through the other side of the last 5 days of legislative session in one piece, and I'll be back on the campaign trail full speed ahead. All
right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mike. And we sincerely hope you have a good day, because a good day in the legislature will probably give us some good news too. So, all right.
Thank you all very
much.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Thanks,
bye, everybody.
Good to see you. Bye, Robin.